Wyoming Territory, December 1872. Snow fell like ash from a broken sky as Archer Hollis rode west through the high pass toward Medicine Bow. His horse, a chestnut mare named June, moved slow through the drifts, nostrils steaming. Archer had seen winters meaner than this, but not by much. He pulled his coat tighter around him, leather stiff with frost, and scanned the white silence ahead. Then he saw it off the trail, half sunk in snow, a wagon tilted to one side like a wounded animal. The canvas top had collapsed under the weight of snow. One wheel was cracked, no oxen in sight. Archer dismounted, boots crunching through crusted ice, and stepped up to the wagon. "Hello," he called. "Anyone there?" No answer. He tugged the flap of the canvas aside. Inside, a woman huddled in the far corner, wrapped in a worn quilt, pale, lips cracked. Her belly round and heavy with child, her eyes fluttered open. "Please." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Save my baby." Archer knelt beside her, unfastening his coat, pulling it around her shoulders. "You are not dying out here," he said, voice low and certain. "Not you, not the baby. Not either of you." She gripped his sleeve with weak fingers. "There's 3 of us," she rasped. "Twins." He stared at her for a second, heart catching, then he nodded. "All 3, he said. "I'll save all 3. He moved fast, no time to waste. He lifted her gently, carried her from the wagon, and set her on the horse, wrapping both of them in every blanket he could find. "What's your name?" "Temperance," she murmured. "Temperance Boone." "I'm Archer Hollis." Her head rested against his chest as he climbed up behind her, one arm locked around her waist to hold her steady. The ride back to his cabin was slow. Snow deepened with each mile. Wind howled through the pines. Temperance barely stirred, except once when she whispered, "I tried to make it to Fort Bridger. My husband, he died 2 weeks ago. Fever. I buried him myself." Archer did not ask more. He just held her tighter. His cabin sat tucked in the pine hills, a mile off the trail. He kicked the door open with his boot and carried her inside. The fire had long since gone out, but he moved quick, laying her on the cot, feeding pine logs into the stove until heat began to return. She was burning up. He boiled water, tore strips from clean linens, and wiped her face. Birth was close. He had seen it before on ranches and out on the trail, but never alone, never like this. "I need you to stay with me, Temperance," he said, kneeling beside her as she cried out from the pain. "You hear me?" She nodded weakly, sweat running down her temple. The first baby came just after midnight. A girl, tiny, screaming, alive. The second followed minutes later, a boy, lungs strong, fists balled. Archer wrapped them in the warmest cloth he had, laid them against their mother's chest. She wept, arms trembling as she pulled them close. "You did it," Archer whispered, brushing damp hair from her forehead. She looked up at him, eyes glassy. "No," she said. "You did." He sat beside her through the night, feeding the fire, watching the babies breathe, watching her breathe. When morning came, the storm had passed. Sunlight spilled through the window, painting pale gold across the wooden floor. Temperance stirred, blinking up at him. "You stayed," she said. "I said I would." Her eyes filled again, but this time not from pain. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked at her, really looked. She was still pale, still weak, but there was strength in her eyes. "You are not alone now," he said quietly. "You will not be alone again." The babies stirred between them, and she looked down at them with awe. "I do not even have names for them." Archer smiled a little. "Then we will find the right ones, together." She looked up at him then, really saw him, and something passed between them, something real, not rescue, not pity. Hope, and something else too, something that could grow. She reached for his hand, he took it. And for the first time in weeks, maybe longer, she let herself believe she would live. Not just survive, but live. With him. With her children. With all 3. By the 6th day, The snow had settled into hard crusts that crunched underfoot, and the trees outside Archer's cabin stood silent beneath the weight of it. The kindling pile had shrunk to a few splinters, and the wood he'd stacked behind the shed was nearly buried. He'd need to cut more soon, but not yet. Inside, the cabin smelled of boiled oats, pine resin, and something softening like a life slowly settling into place. Temperance sat in the rocker by the hearth, one twin swaddled in each arm. Their tiny faces were flushed with sleep, their breath warm against the curve of her neck. Her hair was still uncombed, falling in loose strands across her shoulders, but her color had returned. Her quiet watching had turned into thoughtfulness. Archer poured warm water into a basin and set it on the table. Her voice broke the hush. "You built this place yourself," he nodded, drying his hands on a scrap of linen. "Took near 2 summers to get the roof not to leak. Still creaks when the wind kicks up from the west." "You live here alone?" she asked, but it wasn't the idle question of a stranger. There was weight behind it. "I do," he said. "Did since I came back from Missouri. After the war." Temperance shifted, careful not to wake the babies. "You were a soldier." He eased into the chair across from her, nodding once. "Infantry, Union side. Spent a year at Lookout Mountain, came home to find my folks gone. Fever got him. Cabin burned in a lightning storm after." She looked at him, eyes steady. "You didn't go back east?" "No reason to." Nothing left of the place but chimney stones and a field of briars. Neither spoke for a while. The fire snapped and popped. The boy stirred, letting out a soft sigh, and she rocked him gently. "I was born in Lawrence," she said at last. "Kansas. My daddy was a preacher, strict sort. Thought God kept score." She glanced down at the babies. "He'd have said I'm being punished." Archer leaned back, jaw tight. "I don't hold with that kind of thinking." She met his gaze. "What do you hold with?" "I think life knocks people sideways," he said. "And the only thing that matters is what you do once you're standing again." Temperance looked down at the children in her arms. "I wasn't supposed to be alone. We were headed for a claim near Fort Bridger. My husband had a deed. We were going to build something from nothing." Archer didn't interrupt. She wasn't looking for comfort, only space enough to say what needed saying. "He was a quiet man," she said. "Not hard, just always thinking. He talked to the babies. Even before he knew they were twins." She brushed her fingers against the girl's cheek. "When he got sick, I thought it was just the cold. He wouldn't let me stop. Said to keep going, get to the fort. I didn't know it would turn so fast." She didn't cry. Her voice didn't shake. But her fingers gripped the blanket tight. Archer stood, crossed the room, and knelt beside her. "You didn't leave him behind." "No," she whispered. "I buried him under a cottonwood not far from Rawlins. Marked it with a cross made from his wagon yoke." He placed his hand over hers, not to quiet her but to anchor her. "You got them here," he said. "You did that." She looked at him, then not just looked, but saw him, as if weighing something deeper than the moment. "I haven't spoken to anyone since he passed," she said. "Not really, not like this. You don't have to be alone now." She didn't answer, but her hand didn't pull away. The boy stirred again, and she soothed him with a touch to his shoulder. Archer stood and busied himself with the stew pot, pouring thick broth into 2 tin bowls. "I've been thinking," he said without turning around. "You'll need space for the little ones to grow, a place for them to stretch out. This cabin's too tight." Temperance watched him, brow furrowed. "You mean to send us on?" He turned, bowl in hand. "No, ma'am, I mean to add a second room if you'll stay." She took the bowl slowly, eyes still on his face. "Why?" "Because I want to," he said plainly. "Because there's room in my life for more than silence." The firelight caught her profile as she turned back toward the flames. She said nothing for a long while, just held her children and let the moment settle around them. When she did speak again, her voice was quiet but firm. "I'm not a burden, Archer," he met her eyes. I never thought you were. She nodded once, and for the first time a small smile curved her lips, not from relief, from the stirrings of something steadier. I'll help with the new room, she said. Come spring. He smiled too, slow and honest. We'll make it solid. Good walls, warm roof. She looked down at the babies nestled in her arms. They'll need names, she said. He sat beside her again, bowl untouched. You have any in mind? I do, she said, glancing over at him. But I want to hear yours first. Outside, the wind had stilled. Only the distant creak of the frozen trees remained, like something old shifting to make room for something new. The days turned clear, cold, and bright, with frost rhyming the window panes each morning like lace. Archer had begun stretching canvas over a lean-to beside the cabin, just enough for a stack of seasoned pine and a place to split wood out of the wind. He worked without hurry, glancing often toward the cabin, where the lantern would flicker behind the glass at nightfall, and the baby's cries could be heard faintly, thin and high like bird call. Temperance had taken to humming when she nursed them, melodies without words, slow and low as if meant only for the small ears pressed against her chest. She didn't speak often unless spoken to, but when she did, her voice had gained steadiness, no longer brittle from hardship, but tempered like metal drawn through flame. One afternoon, she stepped outside bundled in Archer's old wool coat, her boots crunching over the packed snow. She stood watching him as he hauled down the last of the firewood, her arms wrapped tight around herself. You always work alone? She asked. He balanced a split log on the stump before answering. Since I left Missouri, haven't had much cause to do otherwise. She hesitated, then stepped closer. I'd like to help. You just had twins, Temperance. I'm not asking to lift the world, just want to earn my place. He straightened, set the axe down, and dusted off his gloves. You already have, far as I'm concerned. She didn't reply, only bent to gather a few logs in her arms. Her movements were slow but sure. He didn't stop her. That evening, she laid the girl in his arms without asking, then sat opposite him near the fire. The baby's head fit neatly beneath his chin, and he held her as if he'd done it before. She let out a single hiccup, then settled, eyes fluttering shut. Temperance rested her head against the wall, watching him. You ever think about having children? Used to, he said. Before the war. Before everything changed. What stopped you? Didn't feel like something I had a right to anymore. She looked at him closely. But you're good with them, he shrugged. I know how to listen to what ain't said. Sometimes that's enough. She reached over, brushed a soot mark from the baby's blanket. You never married? No, why not? He looked at the fire for a long time before answering. The woman I was going to marry died before I got back from Tennessee, typhoid. I buried the ring with her. Temperance's voice softened. I'm sorry. He nodded once, eyes still fixed on the hearth. I kept trying to find reasons not to get close to anyone again. Figured if I stayed out here long enough, I'd stop wanting to. And did you? No. Temperance let the quiet settle, then spoke again. My husband's name was Ali. He liked numbers. Used to spend hours figuring out how much seed we'd need, how many feet of fencing. I never cared for numbers myself. I used to tell him he was trying to measure a world that wouldn't hold still. Archer smiled faintly. Sounds like he was careful. He was, kind but careful. She looked down at her hands. We didn't really know each other when we married. I was 17. My father arranged it. Ali was decent, but we were strangers trying to act like something else. She met Archer's gaze. I don't want to be a stranger again, not with you. He shifted the baby gently in his arms. You're not. They sat in silence after that, the kind that didn't need filling. The fire snapped low, casting a soft orange light over the floorboards. The boy stirred in the cradle, and Temperance rose to tend to him, her movements quiet and sure. Archer watched her, his chest tight with something he hadn't felt in years, something like expectancy. Not hope exactly. Hope was fragile. This was heavier. Rooted. That night, after the children were fed and sleeping, she didn't retreat to the narrow cot by the stove as she had every night before. Instead, she lingered by the table, her palm resting flat on its rough surface. "I don't want to wake them," she said. He stood from where he'd been lacing a new line of fishing hooks. "You won't." Her eyes held his. "If you want me to stay, really stay, I need to know this is something we're both choosing." "I chose the moment I saw you lying in that wagon," he said. "Everything after's just been catching up." She breathed out slow, then stepped toward him, stopping just close enough that the warmth between them changed. "Then say it plain." "I want you here," he said. "With me, with them, not just through winter. For good." Temperance reached for his hand and laced her fingers through his. "Then we'll build it together." Their hands stayed clasped as the firelight faded and the snow outside began to fall again, soft and soundless. Inside, the cabin held the shape of something new, beginning, not rushed, not declared, just quietly, steadily made real. By early March, the ice along the ridgeline had begun to pull back from the southern slopes, and the first thin shoots of green pushed up through the soil behind the cabin. Meltwater streamed down the narrow path Archer had worn between the pine grove and the creek, and the wind carried the scent of damp earth instead of snow. Temperance stood in the doorway, the boy slung against her chest in a sling she'd sewn from one of her husband's old shirts. The girl lay sleeping in a cedar-lined cradle Archer had carved in the evenings after supper, the curved edge smoothed by his thumb. "You always plant this early?" she asked, watching Archer work a spade into the thawed patch near the fence line. "Only when the ground tells me it's ready," he said, lifting a clump of loam and breaking it apart with his fingers. "This year's early. Might get a second crop if we're lucky." She stepped closer, squinting against the morning sun. "What do you grow?" "Beans, mostly. Some corn. Potatoes if the frost don't come back." She settled beside him, lowering herself with care. Her body still ached in places, but she moved with more ease now. "I've never had land that was mine," she said. "Not even a window box." "You've got some now," he said. She glanced at him, brows drawn. "Do I?" He met her gaze. "If you want it." Her hand moved to the dirt, fingers pressing into the soil like she was testing it for truth. "I want to learn," she said. "I want to know what comes from my hands." "You will," he said. "You already are." She smiled faintly, then looked toward the trees. "The babs'll be crawling before the first frost. They'll be walking by the next planting," he said. "You'll see." Later that afternoon, they sat on the porch while the sun dipped low behind the pines. The girl cooed softly in Temperance's lap, her eyes bright and curious. Archer sat sharpening his draw-knife, the metal scraping slow and steady against the whetstone. Temperance tilted her head toward the line of hills to the west. "You ever think of leaving?" "Used to," he said. "Thought about Colorado, maybe even Oregon, but I always circled back to this place." "Why?" He set the knife down. "Because peace is rare, and this land gave it to me in pieces." She traced a pattern on the baby's blanket. "I haven't felt peace since I was a girl." "You feel it now?" She looked at him, eyes soft. "I think I'm remembering how." He reached for her hand, not to pull her closer, just to be near. Her fingers met his, warm and worn at the edges. "I wrote something down," she said. "Names." He waited. "For the girl, I thought Clara, after my mother. She used to hum when she cooked, same as I do now." He nodded. "It suits her." "For the boy, Elias. He should have something of his father, but not all of it. Just enough to know where he came from." Archer looked at the boy asleep in the cradle nearby, his small fist curled against his chest. "Elias and Clara," he said. "They'll know they're loved." Temperance turned toward him. "You mean to stay with us, don't you?" "I already have," he said. She studied his face, and whatever guard she'd kept behind her eyes eased. "Then I'll stop waiting for the other shoe to drop." "There's no shoe," he said. "Only this. Only now." The sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the yard. From the trees came the call of a mourning dove, low and full. The babies didn't stir. Temperance leaned her head against his shoulder. "I didn't know I could feel safe again." He turned his face just enough to press a kiss to her hair. "You're not alone anymore." They sat that way until the cold began to rise and the fire inside called them home. He stood first, lifting Clara with care, and she followed, carrying Elias. No words passed between them as they settled the twins into the cradle and banked the hearth. But something had shifted, quiet and certain. A home had formed, not built in a day but shaped from trust. And in the stillness that followed, there was nothing missing, only belonging. By late April, fresh shoots of rye grass had begun to quilt the ground behind the cabin, and the air carried a warmth that lured bluebirds back to the eaves. Archer was finishing the first half of the addition, a stout walled room framed in lodgepole pine, while Temperance sat nearby beneath a cottonwood. Her needlework spread across her lap, and Clara propped against her legs. Elias dozed in a basket beside her, arms thrown wide as if dreaming of something vast. Archer straightened from his work, rubbing the back of his neck. "We'll have the roof on before the next rain if it holds off." Temperance looked up from her stitching. "You sure you don't want help with the shingles?" He glanced at her, amused. "You planning to climb up there with a baby on each hip?" "I could manage," she said, eyes glinting. He brushed sawdust from his shirt. "I don't doubt you." She set aside the bonnet she'd been hemming, watching him longer than she needed to. "You've done more for us than I can name." He leaned against the frame, arms folded. "You've given more than you know." She hesitated, fingers stilling. "I've been thinking about the land. The deed Ely carried it still in my satchel, never made it to the registrar. You want to claim it?" "I don't want to go back to that trail," she said. "Not now, not ever. But I was wondering if we could file something here together. A homestead." Archer blinked, then stepped toward her. "You're saying you want to stay on this land as yours, as ours," she said. "If you'd have it." He knelt beside her, taking her hand with a steadiness that surprised them both. "Temperance Boone, you've already made this place more than it ever was. I'd be proud to build a life with you on it." She looked down at his hand over hers, then at the children beside them. "I never minded being a Boone, but it was my father's name and then Ely's." He studied her, quiet. She lifted her chin. "I'd like to take your name. If you'd let me." He exhaled slowly, as if something long held had finally let go. "Temperance Hollis," he said. "Sounds like it belongs." She smiled, and this time it was full, unguarded. "Then it's settled." They filed the papers in Medicine Bow the following week, Archer hitching the wagon with gentle care while Temperance bundled the twins in wool wraps. They left early, the morning sun pale behind a veil of mist, and arrived by midday. The clerk took their names with little fanfare, though he did tip his hat when Archer slid the ring across the counter, a simple gold band he'd carried in the bottom of a tobacco tin for over a decade. Temperance slipped it on without hesitation, then turned to Archer. "You waited a long time to give this." "I was waiting for someone who'd stay," he said, back at the cabin. A pair of red-tailed hawks circled overhead. Temperance stood in the doorway of the new room, now framed and roofed, the floorboards still clean and pale. She held Clara against her hip, swaying gently as the breeze stirred her hair. Archer stepped up behind her, Elias in his arms, the boy blinking sleepily at the world. "We'll put a chest here," Temperance said, pointing with her free hand. "And a chair by the window." Archer nodded. "We'll build it all as we need it." She turned to face him fully. "I never imagined I'd be happy again. You are now, she reached up, touching his face. I am Archer. I am. He leaned down, kissed her slowly, reverently, as the wind stirred around them and the children breathed between them, warm and safe. That evening they ate supper outside, seated on a blanket near the edge of the field. The twins lay between them, bundled in quilts, their tiny hands twitching in sleep. The sky above was streaked with lavender and gold, and the air smelled of pine needles and warming soil. Temperance rested her head against Archer's shoulder. I want to plant sunflowers around the porch, then we will. And I want to teach Clara and Elias the names of every bird that nests here. You'll have time. She closed her eyes. I never thought peace would feel like this. He looked out at the land they'd claimed, the home they'd built, and the life they'd begun. Me neither. They stayed there until the stars came out, until the fireflies blinked along the edge of the clearing and the world held nothing but quiet joy. In the seasons that followed, the cabin grew. A porch was added, the sunflowers bloomed tall, and the garden yielded more than they expected. The twins learned to crawl, then walk, then run barefoot across the field, their laughter carrying across the valley. Temperance taught them songs her mother used to sing. Archer showed them how to mend a fence and set a snare. On the warmest nights, they all slept with the windows open, the sound of crickets and wind weaving through their dreams. And every morning before the day began, Archer would kiss his wife's hand and whisper her name like a promise. They lived simply but not quietly, with love that grew like roots deep, unseen, unshakable, together always. Forever.